Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, first impressions are everything, right? And if you overshadow the flaws, then to your point, you're sort of creating this first impression that then the resident views in their mind, and that's sort of their experience over a long bit of time. And so if even if they have a good experience, they might have this flawed move in that might impact or influence their want or need to renew at some point in time.
On this live episode of Transforming Cities, I was joined by Mike Brewer of the Multifamily Media Network and the Multifamily Collective, and Mike DiMella of Charlesgate. During our live event, our guests debated and discussed staging as it relates to leasing success, AI and automation, and the balance of both moving forward. We also threaded in a few audience questions during and after the debate. If this type of content is something you're excited about and you want to see more of, please like and subscribe and follow along with us at Transforming Cities for more. Without further ado, let's jump right in. Mike and Mike, thank you so much for joining me today. And everyone out there watching, thanks for joining us on the staging debate today. Just as a reminder, this is brought to you by Transforming Cities. We are a platform that really focuses on research-backed insights, have a lot of great go-to-market guidance and insights week over week. Our big thing is how can we push better ROI with less risk with what we're doing on the go-to-market side of things, lease up faster, do better across the board. So if you're interested in that type of content and more content like this, please hop on over to transformingcities.io, subscribe, follow along, give us your feedback, let us know what you want to see more of. Today, I'm excited to welcome Mr. Mike Brewer and Mike DiMella to the program. I think everybody probably knows both of these gentlemen at this point, but Mr. Brewer is a seasoned multifamily operations expert. He has almost 3 decades of experience, which kudos to you, Mike, for that. That's a long time to be an advocate in the industry. He's the co-founder of Multifamily Media Network, which I'm sure everyone has seen pop up around the internet over the last couple of months. He's worked with public companies, private enterprises, family offices. He has a truly comprehensive understanding of the industry. So I'm really thrilled to have him on board today for this conversation. You can find out more at multifamilymedianetwork.com and also multifamilycollective.com for his personal podcast. So thanks, Mike, for joining us. And then we also have Mike DiMella with us again today. So Mike has become a staple around these parts. We're glad to see him again, a nationally recognized leader in the real estate industry and one of Boston's 40 under 40 professionals as well. I usually make some joke about me not being in my 30s anymore, but I'll save that one this time. Mike's the managing partner at Charlesgate, and where he helps investors develop, go to market, and operate multifamily to really generate market beating returns, which is a big thing that Mike talks about, which is great. Charlesgate.com is the address there if you want to go check that out. So today's live, like our last live, really had to do with a podcast, or excuse me, a LinkedIn post that's now turning into a podcast and a live event discussion all around staging. Mr. Brewer jumped in with a few thoughts. Mike DiMella jumped in with a few thoughts, and it was a really fun debate back and forth on LinkedIn, which is where a lot of this stuff starts. So I love it. So today we're going to talk about staging, but I think staging really quickly gets into sales and leasing and automation versus human touch. And what I love about the pre-call that we had with Mike and Mike is that they both have some really great points, and I think they agree on a lot of things, but they come at it from really differing experiences and have some differences of opinion as well. So a little bit of a rundown here. I have to put in this dad joke. I think we're going to first set the staging here and talk about where this came from and what these viewpoints are as we jump in. We'll get into the role of the salesperson. I think that's a really fascinating topic always when we're thinking about leasing. Automation versus human touch, like what's too much, what's too little. And then one thing that came up on our pre-call is, should we have a different approach for different types of properties? Really kind of an interesting fold to this. As we work through this conversation, for those watching, please feel free to drop your comments, your questions in. We try to hit those as much as possible too throughout the discussion. So without further ado, let's maybe start with you, Mike Brewer. You had a really interesting entry point into this topic of staging. So if you wouldn't mind kick us off and kind of tell us where your point of view really originates for the idea of staging.
Yeah, definitely. And let me start by saying, Chris, thank you for inviting me to this conversation. Mike, I'm looking forward to it. You're definitely a wonderful debater, so this should be fun. I'm not sure where it all started for me. Obviously, I've been in the business for a very long bit of time. I've worked primarily in workforce housing, so it's market rate, but more workforce oriented. And I've always had this love-hate relationship with staged apartments. But when I think about it from a personal perspective, I'll sort of preface by saying I'm an introvert, and I don't necessarily like a salesperson being in an interaction with me, and I don't like staged apartments. So when I go look for an apartment and or a home, which I did most recently, I like seeing a space that is void of furniture, right? I don't think I like to exercise my own imagination as it relates to what I'm going to put in that apartment or in that house to make the environment good for me and healthy for me, right? So I don't need to see what you've staged in the apartment in order for me to register something along my buying path, or it's not going to be a catalyst for me to make a decision to rent an apartment or a home.
Mike DiMella, I know that you have some good counter thoughts to that. What has been your experience
Yeah.
to the high level topic of staging?
Yeah, and Mike, I'm looking forward to diving in here as well and batting this around for folks. But I think my perspective is that I take sort of maybe a different path into this, and rather than taking my personal perspective on what I prefer personally, I just like to try to, as much as possible, look at the data, what does work, where the investments pay off or don't pay off in terms of how staging may work and drive an ROI, and how, like, and you just mentioned salespeople versus automated showings as well, which ones are driving, frankly, better conversions and better rents, better resident experience across the board. So, and from our experience coming from, we certainly do just some workforce, but we do a lot of high end new housing as well, a lot of development, lease ups, and things like that. I think it's been very clear to us that having a model staged has been a major driver in absorption and sort of the way prospective residents perceive the building and perceive, or are able to visualize what they may be getting in that building, how to lay out furniture and units, and what it may be like to live in a property. And so we've seen that data really show that staging is, in fact, one of the best investments to do to help accelerate absorption, reduce vacancy, and drive rents. And so that's where I kind of attack it from. I've seen the results, and I think you and I are both introverts from our pre-conversation. Understand we may not want to deal with salespeople all the time. That said, I think that's a lot of that is based on the myth of a salesperson, or the perception of a salesperson, rather than being someone who's trying to deliver a hospitality mindset and help you make a good decision. It's salespeople and leasing people, especially those that are in a sort of assistant property manager role and also trying to do leasing, oftentimes aren't trained well enough and aren't truly good salespeople, in the sense that they're trying to help someone, not just sell them on something that they don't need or want. So that's my basic perspective on this.
I guess I'll call you Mike B and Mike D. Maybe that works.
That's Mike, tricky too, actually.
Yeah, that is tricky, isn't it? Mike Brewer, you brought up a really good point in our pre-call around workforce housing versus Class A or luxury, or however you want to think about it. So, and I want to put a pin on the introverted sales
Sure.
pitch stuff, because I want to come back to that. But anyway, you made a good point around, staging is not necessarily a thing that is, in your experience with workforce housing, needed or required or really necessary. So talk to us a little bit about, like, the difference in asset type and where you see staging being a performance measurable asset versus where it's not necessarily needed.
Yeah, I think in the workforce housing, from personal experiences in staging apartments, what I experienced over time was we would go in and we would stage specific units with brand new appliances, and we would really doll up the unit, right? And someone would go in and look at that particular unit, and then they would move into something else, right? Another unit, like kind floor plan, or even not like kind floor plan. But that unit that they moved into didn't necessarily have new appliances. It had good workable appliances, right? And it wasn't to the nines, like we made the show
Mm.
unit, right? And so you have this sort of, I'm going to call it bait and switch. That's probably the wrong thing to call it, but you had this sort of perception that you create with the model unit, and then somebody else moves into something else and they're a bit disappointed because it doesn't look or feel like the staged unit.
Mm.
So, Mike, now that you've just admitted to baiting and switching people, I feel like I've won this debate already. But no, just kidding. But actually, that's a really good point, because there's a balance and a strategy on how you select units to stage and model and things like that. And there was I've heard the philosophy that you want to stage the very best ones and the upgraded and all this other stuff, which I think is counterproductive for all the reasons you just said. What you want to do is sort of get more to like an average and make it sing, or even in some cases, actually, we've staged what we would perceive as the worst units, or ones that weren't absorbing well or renting well. And because after staging, they rented faster and better, because people could actually visualize. Maybe there were some flaws in the floor plan. Maybe there wasn't a great place for a furniture layout that was difficult to visualize without, having it have furniture in it. But yeah, I agree with you. You don't want to be in the mode where you're sort of tricking people into falling in love with something that they're not really going to be able to get. That's an absolutely key part. I think that's a failure in the strategy of staging in some cases, where it actually is more in the opposite direction, that allows it to work well and drive absorption, drive rents, drive experience for renters.
Yeah, I definitely think, I mean, first impressions are everything, right? And if you overshadow the flaws, then to your point, you're sort of creating this first impression that then the resident imbues in their mind, and that's sort of their experience over a long bit of time. And so even if they have a good experience, they might have this flawed move in that might impact or influence their want or need to renew at some point in time.
Mm.
Yeah, I think the other thing to think about is, like, you and I and Chris and others, are probably many people on this live stream, are in the business, and we look at floor plans all the time. We look at units, we look at empty units, we look at units getting renovated, we look at messy units and pristine units, and it's a lot easier for us, but just by virtue of our reps doing it, that we can see the vision perhaps without furniture. But I think for the general public, that's very difficult for most people to visualize how they might live in a space without having some, so call it, direction in terms of how a model might be staged or set up. And I think that makes it a lot easier for people to see the value, in fact, of what they're going to rent at some point. So that to us is where the value really comes in, as opposed to, because we do get this question that comes up: is it really worth it? Is the investment in staging worth it? Because, I can just visualize where the furniture would go. But oftentimes the eye in that conversation is someone who's been in the industry for a long time, and it's much easier for them to see sort of beyond the bare walls and visualize how they would live there.
Well, that's actually it. Just to jump in there, Mike, because I think this actually leads into the next point that you two, I think, have a little bit of a differing opinion on, which is great. Is one of the things you mentioned to me is that you feel like someone can actually, when we think about the salesperson who is paramount in this journey, you actually feel like they can jump in and sell the vision of an unmerchandised space versus one that's dressed up to the nines, to use your phrasing. And I think, Mike DiMella, you obviously you have a little bit of a different take on that. But Mike Brewer, why do you think that is? Or obviously you've seen that be successful, where you can walk into a blank canvas and they can sort of help you envision what that space would look like.
Yeah, I definitely think the role of the salesperson, very good, very versed salespeople, almost use that demonstration of a unit as a relationship building process, right? And if somebody doesn't have a vivid imagination where they can picture their bed or nightstands or dresser or anything else in the apartment, the salesperson can step in and sort of demonstrate that. They can even go through the exercise of physically walking off a bed. Hey, you have a king bed. I know that a king bed is 6x6 or it's 7x6 or whatever it is. Let me step that off for you. And through the process of physically walking out things like that, they're demonstrating their care and their concern and their empathy and their compassion in that sales process, and their ability to think on their feet. And that imbues this level of trust in a prospect's mind that helps them get to that buying decision.
So I totally agree on the philosophy there of the fact that a salesperson needs to be helpful in building relationships and trying to help someone envision how they can live there and see the value being delivered. I guess my thought on this, though, is why make their job harder than it needs to be without having furniture or staging or a model set up in the first place. And I think especially if you can, for instance, if you have one or two sort of staged models perhaps, and then, and then continue to build the relationship, do an effectively enabled touring, process and journey, you can then bring them to perhaps the actual unit they're seeing, which may not be staged or furnished. And then you can continue that with all the things you just said. But I think for us at least, it's been very much a positive return on investment, where we have faster conversions and residents who are more readily able to make a decision when we have staged furniture. And we have compared it to, by the way, like showing them pictures of things that are virtually staged, just pictures of furniture versus actually staged. And it makes a dramatic difference when it's actually staged in real life, not just seeing, imagery of sort of virtual staging or otherwise. But philosophically, I absolutely agree from the role of the salesperson, the leasing, professional, is to build that relationship, help identify where, people need to see and visualize a unit a little bit better and how they would live there, for sure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Transforming Cities. Brought to you by Authentic, delivering premier multifamily brand experiences and smart digital marketing. Authentic's proven approach accelerates leasing velocity, boosts rental rates, and increases long-term value. You can find out more at AuthenticFF.com. And by Charlesgate, the multifamily investor's secret weapon to help underwrite, go to market, and operate projects that generate market-beating returns. With an adaptive staffing model and on-demand leasing teams, Charlesgate empowers a better resident experience at an efficient cost structure for today's owners. Visit charlesgate.com for more. I think we all agree that having that human touch still really matters in this process, but maybe where we differ is where the automation and that human touch is kind of bridging the gap, whatever those gaps may be, in terms of, perception and in terms of sales, or from the renter's perspective, what they feel like they might be missing out on. We've already had a question or two come through about self-guided tours and sort of augmented reality. When we think about these fully automatic touring platforms versus the sort of the blended model, and we still see a lot of groups that are just doing 100% kind of human touch, human guided tours. Where do you both fall on that spectrum? What are your thoughts around that? Mike Brewer, let's start with you on that one.
So I'm all in on tech, and I think, and it's not that I'm after eliminating the leasing consultant role or the sales role, but I do think that consumer behavior is really being driven by bigger organizations and large enterprises out in the world, right? Apple, Amazon, et cetera. So we're influenced by those experiences that we have there. And I think that plays into the multifamily space in the way that consumers want to show up and interact with our brands, right? And so to the extent that they're doing things in an automated way or a frictionless way in those other arenas or ecosystems, they want to come here and they want to have that same experience that's low human touch, very frictionless, very seamless. And it doesn't necessarily need the salesperson. I mean, Amazon sells zillions of dollars worth of products every day, and there is no human touch in that, right? And I think that same experience is making its way into the multifamily space. And I think my opinion is that at some point, it's already here today, but I think it'll be a more sort of massively adopted exercise in the future.
I think you raised some good points there, and I would position, or I would say my position is that I am human first plus automation, not automation first, like maybe you alluded to. So, because I think if you look at the actual evidence, or at least in my opinion, I don't mean to sound like that, but I mean, you see there's a loneliness crisis, a loneliness epidemic right now, right? And I think that is driven or being driven by some of these corporate decisions that are not really, or they're in the guise of efficiency or what consumers want. But I don't know that consumers really want so much automation or so much lack of interaction. You can take the Amazon example. I think it's a lot different shopping on the Amazon website, or if you look at Amazon's no person checkout stores that they closed because they weren't succeeding, right? So I think there's a difference there that we have to consider. Now, I'm not saying we're not potentially moving in that direction where there's more and more automation. And I think there's a big place for AI and automation, especially in sort of instant responses and helping kind of take care of some of the background. But when you lose that human touch, I think that's bad. I think that's bad in general. I think it's bad for the performance of properties, but I think it's bad for people just in general. And I think that, again, I think there will be a place for just a totally automated living environment, perhaps that some people do choose, but I think the majority of people aren't going to choose or want that direction in reality. And my sense is that there's going to be a little bit more of a continual response, which I think we're already starting to see, where people are just not really into everything being so automated, touchless, lack of human interaction. That I think, but it's important to have this blend, right? Because you need to drive efficiency, you need to make people's jobs easier, you need to make it easier and frictionless to go tour and lease. We need to do all those things, but I think it's dangerous to for both the performance of the property and also for resident experience to lose that, to completely eliminate the hospitality that only humans can deliver in an effective way, at least as of now.
So I absolutely agree with all those points that you just made. I think the one caveat to me is in the sales process, right? I think you can go completely automated in the sales process, but you still need humans in your leasing office, business office, or whatever. But take that part out of the equation, and now your leasing office is a place where people can come, they can set down their devices, they can remove the distractions because all of the routine work has been disappeared, right? And now I can have a real conversation like this one, right? I'm not looking at my phone right now because I have to be focused on a debate, but in an apartment environment, I can walk into a leasing or a clubhouse now, and whoever that human is and whatever they're called at that point in time is not distracted by the telephone. They're not distracted by the work that needs to be done on the PC in my office. They can be real and present and have a really fruitful conversation, which it's not in every case, but in a lot of cases today, you walk into a leasing office and it's just sometimes chaos. That might be an extreme word, but it's chaos. And you can't really have a human touch interaction in that chaos.
Well, I agree. Sorry, just to jump on that for once. I agree. Yep. I agree with that, Mike. So I think what we have leaned to solving for that is, this is not what this conversation is about, but really about creating a functional specialization where we have our leasing team, our centralized leasing team, who is just focused on that leasing experience. And then you have resident services managers who are focused on the sort of hospitality, operational hospitality. They're not also responsible for accounting, leasing, marketing, bookkeeping. We're sort of splitting those types of roles, and there's a lot more to it. But I think we're leaning to saying the problem you recognize is very real, that chaos in the office and not being able to actually do work. But I think we have to solve it with part of it with technology, but part of it with just structurally building out a better org structure and operating model for properties to really, really solve that. And along with the aligned ways I was speaking with earlier on the last question.
Mike Brewer, to your Amazon comment, I was thinking about that as you were explaining it, and I was following along just to the point of, and someone made this comment a few minutes ago around, I agree. Amazon has this great touchless, I can see what I want, or I can think I know what I want. I can order it, and then I can get it. And then I can realize, oh no, this isn't what I wanted after all. Right. And so I'm curious to hear from your perspective, knowing that there isn't like this 30-day return policy for apartments. How do you bridge that gap? Is it that last step, like at the leasing office where you do have that human touch that's, hey, let's check it out before you sign on the dotted line? Or how does that, technically work from a business perspective?
I think what pops into my head, I don't know if this necessarily fits the question or the comment, but in an apartment shopping environment, I'm actually physically walking in the space, right? It's just DIY. I'm still walking in the space. I'm still physically seeing that before I actually make a buying decision. That doesn't mean that there isn't room for somebody buying sight unseen, right? And looking at things over the internet. You live in DC, you're renting in Atlanta, you can do that. But in my head, if I want to rent an apartment, I'm going to physically walk into that space. Just like the home I just rented, the one I'm sitting in today, I physically walked in this house before I made that transaction, which is very different from Amazon, right? I can't hold that thing before I actually purchase it. Amazon makes it easy for me to return and get something else. But I think the difference is I can physically walk in this space versus not being able to do that with Amazon.
Right.
I don't know if that speaks to the remark, but that's what pops in my head.
Yeah,
I think that's true, Mike. I think the other thing though I would add for even more context. So what the decision here is not to buy a $50 cleaning product, or even $100 or $200 or $400 or TV for $1,000, let's say. This is a 20, 30, 50,000 if you're in a real high cost market decision that's a year long. And never mind that, but all the emotional surrounding that for like your home. And so I think the decision has a lot more importance and a lot more concerns for the folks for the prospects coming into lease. Are they making the right decision? And having someone to help them. Again, this doesn't mean everybody. Some people probably almost certainly prefer automation, but my supposition here is that most people want to have that help and that guidance and that, help them through that emotional journey and decision-making process. If done well, we're also just kind of assuming that we've got people who are good, effective salespeople and communicators and all this other stuff. But if done well, I think more people prefer that and find it to be very helpful for them, at least from our experience overall, because it is a big decision. It's about, this primary need you have, your home, and it's a major expense, probably your biggest expense in many cases. And so I think that's why I would lean to really helping or really leaning into this more human hospitality touch than automation.
It's interesting. What comes to mind for me is I think the emotional guide in many of those big ticket decisions is somebody else in your family, right? I would never rent a home without my wife physically walking in the space, right? I would never do that, ever. I know better, right? And I also think the youth in our generation, right, wrong, or indifferent, they invite their parents or somebody that they trust into that buying experience with them. So when they're touring a physical apartment space unstaged, right, they want to see where they're going to live. Part of that emotional journey is that person's validation of the space that they're choosing for themselves. It's not necessarily the salesperson, right? The salesperson is there. I get your points, but I think a real big emotional decision like that is really sort of supported by other people in your friend or circle of friends.
Yeah, without a doubt. But I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both, right? And but I agree with you. And by the way, I hope my wife is not tuned in, because you're a far better husband than I am. Just not making any big decisions without her. So, but I think it's a both. I think, again, to have even with the other emotional support, you may have a significant other, a wife, a family, parents, whatever it might be. I think having someone with expertise about the property, what it's like to live there, what's going on in the neighborhood, what are the amenities, how to use everything, make sure you're not, make sure you're understanding fully what you're buying into is the type, because I think what happens in a lot of these automated tours, a lot of things get missed, right? So I think it prevents people. It adds friction, because I think it makes it harder for people to make decisions. That's the financial impact, and it reduces absorption and potentially reduces rent by cutting down the demand. But two, it actually leads people to make worse decisions, because they don't have all the best information they need to make the right decision for them. And I'm not saying that the automated touring is not getting, self-guided touring is not getting better, and it's not better than it ever was, and it will continue to be. But I still think there is at this point in time, there's still a big loss in terms of what residents need and what the property wants in terms of the outcomes, financial results.
Yeah, and I'm definitely working under the presumption that people do a lot of homework before they actually arrive at your property, right? And if you've done a good job of staging your website or merchandising your website, right, with good information, then when I show up to your community, I'm probably already 90% there. And I'm making that number up, right? But I'm a good way down the decision-making process. And that final step for me is seeing the physical space. Sorry, my watch is going crazy. The last piece for me is walking in the physical space, right? Yeah. And getting that last data point before I pull the trigger.
Yeah, really I think that's. Sorry, Chris.
No, go for it.
No, I said I think that's true, Mike. I think people are much further down the journey than ever before earlier, and that's why sort of great and proper communication and marketing ahead of time and nurturing of residents is critically important. I'm just really still leaning on the fact that we just haven't seen that necessarily borne out when we have tried things like, again, less staging or more self-guided, more automation. The results have been worse, which to me indicates that people are having a harder time making a decision and aren't quite getting the same experience in order to make that decision than they would otherwise.
Is your leasing or sales team using that as sort of this crutch, and now they're not as confident in their ability to sell the unit because it's not staged? That's just, I'm
That's a good
wondering.
question.
Yeah, look, it's a good question. I think it is perhaps worthy of a little bit more discovering on our part. I don't think that's the case. From all the evidence that I've seen, but it's a good question that we would certainly I will take back to the team and can try to dive into some more. But I don't think that's the case given what we've seen to date. I mean, even within the context of a single building with stacks of units, and when we move staging from one unit type to another unit type, absorption change, so it makes an impact across the board, even within the context of a single building with different unit types, on how much the absorption changes when we have that ability. So certainly the intention is that it makes a salesperson's job easier. It makes the consumer's job choosing, making a decision easier. I think that is exactly the point. But could the world's best salespeople overcome that objection with less challenges? Perhaps, but I think then we're relying and setting the bar kind of far too high for what we're expecting for salespeople or leasing people in the industry.
One of the things that I've been really enjoying about these live comments coming through is that clearly there's a lot of different opinions out there. There are people that are very squarely in the staging camp and others that are more so leaning into technology. And where I'd like to end up today is kind of asking the big impossible question, which is to say, can we do either or, and should it be property specific? So for example, maybe we have a very tech centric area that we're opening up a building in San Francisco, and we want to go fully automated, fully tech based. And then maybe there's a different property that needs to be positioned entirely different in a different part of the country. Do either of you guys have any sort of magic 8-ball future visioning as far as how you see this evolving in the years to come? Because clearly in this conversation and in the comments, people are pretty divided and they think either or both, and there's not really a clear path forward. Mike Brewer, let me just throw that giant question your way and see how you tackle it.
Well, I think my answer is probably going to be very short. I think that you're going to see these sort of polarized extremes that are going to, run after either end of this question, and then over a bit of time, 18 to 24 months, 36 months, whatever, I don't know what the timeline is, you're going to see this sort of coming back to the middle, and there'll be a hybrid approach to what we're talking about. I think the points that Mike made about what I term organizational design, not centralization, but you're organizing your effort and your property management company in a way that really plays into those things that you find high touch human involvement versus technology. You're going to figure out what that is, and you're going to employ that. But right now, we're in the wild, wild west, and we're all trying to figure it out, and nobody has the correct recipe. But at some point over the next 18 to 36 months, that recipe is going to make itself known to all asset types, and we're all going to adopt some version of this that works for us in our business plan.
Yeah. No, good points, Mike. I don't want to be perceived as a Luddite here on this call. So just to be clear, we are very much rapidly and use a lot of technology and automation, and we rapidly have for quite a long time. So my point of view in this is that it's not an either or, it's a both. And so we're continuing to incorporate the right technology at the right touch points and the right automation and the right things at the right touch point, the right points in the process, such that we are able to deliver a great resident experience and improve financial results for the property. And that's how we attack it. I also would say it's not only one or the other across the spectrum either. I think to Mike's point you just made, I think there'll be, and there already are, some operators who are really leaning into delivering this sort of automated experience. And there are certainly, I'm sure, residents who appreciate and want that. And then there are residents who want even a more high-end, high-touch, super high-touch. And then there's most of us in the middle, right? And so I don't disagree with all of those things. I just think in terms of, and I guess, Chris, to the question too, yes, every property is unique. And I think if you can align the sort of, and to go back to what Authentic does too, like the brand and the marketing is aligned with the experience and the feeling of what happens on site and the experience going forward with that. If all those things are really in tune, and you're attracting the people who are appreciating what you're delivering as a building, as a product, as a home, whether it's fully automated into the nines, and you got to walk through a body scanner on the way in, or if it's, super high touch and you have like 12 staff for each resident, obviously exaggerating both ends of the spectrum, but there's definitely plenty of place for everybody to find their needs fit. And our context, or my context here and overall, is just saying, hey, each individual property or portfolio has goals that you're trying to achieve, and how you deliver against those goals there's a spectrum to how you do that. We lean to saying, as of now, and I think in the near future, people are going to continue to want more of the human touch. And I think we've been moving away from that a little bit too rapidly for most people to be comfortable with, which is driving some of these issues in society, like loneliness epidemics and other things that are problematic.
I think those are great points, guys. I want to make sure that we have some time for audience questions. I've seen a few pop in here. As any of those come in here, I want to thank you guys again for hopping on today and being willing to debate and talk through these topics. I think it's really fascinating. We're at a really sort of interesting intersection in the industry when it comes to how to sell and lease effectively, and what is going to work and what's maybe not going to work the best moving forward. I think the jury's still out on a lot of that. And I love that both of you come at it from different perspectives. Janet, you had a good question here for me, so I'll just kind of put myself in the hot seat really quickly. She asked our perspective on whether we could see going to market with the new development without a model. Where could I see that working or not? That's a great question, and I think I'm unfortunately going to take the kind of middle ground stance here. I think you can do as much as possible with merchandising and staging the units on the website as possible, and making it look like a really slick, fully thoughtful branded experience on the website. But to me, I think for optimal kind of business outcomes, you're still going to need someone on site to say, hey, here's what it looks like, here's what it's all about. But that's not to say that could change, and I would very much be on board with that change in the future. I think it's very possible that as a society, we move more towards automation and then find different ways to be interconnected in some of the ways, Mike DiMella, that you're mentioning, that we're sort of losing. And I fully agree with that too. So Jason, let me hit this question for you, and Mike, feel free to jump in here. He asked, has anyone offered the entire model package to rent or buy, listed and tagged the items for easy purchase? This is a really interesting concept too. I've seen this personally in a couple different communities, but not very often. Mike, have you seen this or experienced this?
Sorry, Mike. Yeah, so I've seen it. We haven't personally. Ourselves actually sort of executing it. We have talked about it, but we haven't actually gone full bore with it. I think it's a neat idea potentially, though, especially if you can create a strategic partnership with furniture seller, interior designer, whereby you're offsetting the costs of staging and merchandising in that way. That I think it can make a lot of sense potentially.
With another question here about, and I laugh a little bit about this because I remember doing this 6 or 7 years ago when Matterport first came out. But they mentioned, to further muddy the waters, what about Matterport 3D tours in addition to staging and so forth? What do you guys think about Matterport 3D tours?
I think they're wonderful. I think the risk you run is that you sort of oversell the unit in a sense. Like if you, going back to the point of overstaging it, and then somebody walks in, sees that, and then moves to a vacant apartment that doesn't live up to that expectation or doesn't fit that expectation, then you've sort of lost them, or at least created a subpar first impression.
Yeah, I would just add, and so I can prove my non-Luddite bona fides here. We were actually the first firm in Boston, an area in this metro, to start using Matterport. So again, I think it's a great tool, but it's another one of the tools that's technology, and you got to do it the right way. To what Mike has just said, you want to use things like that in a way that can enhance the experience and allow a better and faster decision-making process to help people make the right decision. And I can give you another example. Like, I can remember the case right at the beginning of COVID, we were just starting lease up of a 170 unit building just in a suburb right outside of Boston. And we were just starting to lease up, and it was like March 2020 when we just had to immediately pivot to sort of everything virtual and Matterport. And so tools like that are great, again, as an add-on done right. But so we do use a lot of these, virtual tools, video, on-site, different things that can absolutely help and enhance the experience as just as staging as well. And so we're trying to create this quality experience that is generating, quality signals in people's minds so that they perceive more value from the property and they can make a decision easier with less friction. So all of these tools, well, many of these tools are really great and powerful. It's just a matter of how you utilize them in a process effectively.
Guys, I love it. This has been a great conversation. And what I really enjoy about these is that we have the opportunity to keep the conversation going on LinkedIn. So I encourage you both to jump into the comments after we hop off the live today. And certainly anyone watching this recorded, being able to jump in, add a few more comments or questions, or reach out to the both of you directly. That would be great as well. So I want to thank you both again, Mike and Mike, for joining me today. Short and sweet, but I feel like we covered a ton of stuff in the last 35, 40 minutes. So thank you both for joining us on Transforming Cities Live today, guys. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah,
thank you, Chris.
And Mike. Always love talking to smart guys like you. So this is awesome. Love it.
Oh, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. Yep. Very fun.
Thank you, guys.